Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to see so many people connected, some friendly faces, names at least. So good day, everyone. Friends, comrades, colleagues. My name is Chastain. Sorry. Webinar today, and welcome everyone. This webinar is titled Stop the Attacks Against Peasants, and it's a webinar on the situation of the peasants in the Philippines. It's organized by the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, ICHRP, and it's co-sponsored by the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty, PCFS, and also by the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, IPM-SDL. It's organized today, it's the first one of 2 webinars, organized in line with the celebration of the Peasant Month this October in the Philippines, and it aims to highlight the struggle of the peasants in the Philippines for genuine land reform, and also against state violence at the hands of Marcos regime, Marcos Jr. This webinar will feature speakers from the peasant movement, as well as from the International Solidarity Movement. But before we formally start, please, may we remind everyone to observe the following online etiquettes. Keep your microphone on mute, please, because I've just heard one of the persons connected. It's kind of disturbing, so please keep your microphone on mute. If you can rename yourself, your name, pronouns, and organization, please use the Zoom chat box freely. You can express inputs, comments, you can share resources, reflection, solidarity. Please, all comments should be respectful. In consideration of the limited time that we have, if you can please type all your questions to the speakers in the Zoom chat and the box for the Q&A later. Okay. Now we formally begin our program, and I will introduce our first speaker. He's the chairman emeritus of Kilusang Magbubukid ng Filipinas, KMP. It's the Peasant Movement of the Philippines, a former Department of Agrarian Reform Secretary, and a 3-term Anak Pawis party list representative. It's really an honor to have you here, Kapeng. Please, everyone, welcome Rafael Kapeng Mariano.
Thank you very much, Claire. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. A warm greetings of solidarity from the Philippines and from the Peasant Movement of the Philippines, KMP. In the Philippine context, peasant class remains the single biggest exploited and oppressed class in a semi-colonial, semi-feudal Philippine society. So, next slide, please. Next slide. And next slide. Okay. The very character of the Philippine agriculture, the agricultural production in the Philippines remains backward, agrarian, pre-industrial, fragmented, as well, and small scale. And 68% of farm work is done manually. And yeah, because majority of the Filipino peasants do not have or do not own machines and farm equipments. So they use manual labor. And 2 million hectares are 2 million hectares are irrigated. So there's still more than 1 million hectares that still undeveloped, meaning mainly rent-fed. And small farms are fragmented with the average size of 1.3 hectares. As per the data from the Philippine Statistics Authority based on the Census of Agriculture and Fisheries in 2012. So we have a low productivity wherein the average yield per hectare of rice lands remains 80 kabans of unhusked rice, equivalent to 52 kabans of rice. No? So next slide, please. So we are in deepening crisis. The Philippine agriculture is in deepening crisis, wherein the share of agriculture in the gross domestic product of the country is very small, meager, with less employment in the countrysides because of non-developed, because we have an undeveloped agricultural sector. And yes, because of lack of yes, genuine land reform in the countrysides, because of the continuing implementation of neoliberal economic policies. So we will go to the impacts of that later. Next slide, please. Yeah, we will have a brief agrarian history. Yes. In the colonial period, the peasants serve as the main main class in the anti-colonial and anti-feudal struggle of the Filipino people. Oh, and even during the post-war independence, we were given a nominal independence in 1946, and there were a number of agrarian reform laws and programs being implemented. But even during the Marcos Senior regime, under the U.S.-backed dictatorial regime of Marcos Senior, Ferdinand Marcos Senior, he issued a presidential decree which covers only the rice and the lands primarily devoted to the production of rice and corn, tenanted, meaning with the shared tenants in agricultural lessees being exploited. And yeah, with this neoliberal globalization, neoliberal economic policies are being implemented even under this regime of Marcos Jr. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the situation of the Filipino peasantry. The Filipino peasants are considered now the very poor or the poorest in the Philippine countryside, with a small piece of fox. Where in the rural areas, there is a 30% poverty incidence, and 24% are food insecure uh, uh, up to now. The Philippines is the world's largest rice importer to date, and we can conclude that the most food insecure people and country in the world is the Filipino people and the Philippines. So so next slide, please. And the situation of the farm workers, the rural laborers, the seasonal migrant workers, agricultural workers, mostly in the big land holdings, haciendas, we call it haciendas, and plantations, primarily in the Mindanao Island. No? The number are increasing and being pushed out of the agricultural production. No local industries for employment because the lack of program for national industrialization. And even the number of seasonal farm workers are increasing. And the poor peasants are being exacted with high land rent or lease rentals. No? Next slide, please. We have the land problem. Landlessness remains the fundamental problem of the Filipino peasants, the Filipino peasantry. Uh, uh, that's why the Filipino peasants are suffering from various forms of feudal and semi-feudal exploitation, high land rent or lease rentals, low prices of their farm produce, high interest rate on production capital, and low wages of farm workers. No? Not only the seasonal farm workers, but also the agricultural workers in big haciendas and plantations in the country. And there is the very negative impacts of imperialist plunder and neoliberalism in the Philippines, and this very intensifying state terrorism, state fascism, and lawfare, using repressive laws to repress, to oppress the Filipino peasants. We call it criminalization of peasants and their struggles for land. No? So, and big plantations are being controlled or are under the actual possession and control of big local and foreign agro corporations. And there's also the problem of land use conversions, meaning firstly reclassifying agricultural lands to non-agricultural use or classification, and then followed by rampant conversion of agricultural lands to non-agricultural uses. And with the very bogus land reform program existing in the country, so the big landlords further exploits the landless peasants with various forms of exploitation. Next slide, please. And that is where, until now, next slide, please. Until now, not less than 7 out of 10 peasants are landless, or they do not own the land they till, because land holdings, big tracts of lands, are still in the monopoly of big landlords and comprador. And also, most of the lands in the plantation areas are controlled by big agro corporations through various forms of arrangements. We call it joint venture arrangements, leaseback arrangement, corporative scheme, and other form of arrangements that really continually deprive the peasants of the right to land. No? Next slide, please. Yeah, there are, I think, for the Filipino people, they are the familiar faces of the big landlords, comprador bourgeois in the Philippines, and also big bureaucrat capitalists. The Villars, the Ramon Ang, the Coangcos, Ayala Sobels, the Consunhis, no? They are what you call this, engaged in what you call this land banking. No? They buy more and more lands in the Philippines for the real estate development and other non-agricultural uses. No? Next slide, please. And yeah, if you look at this map of the Philippines, being what they call this parcelized with a number of we call it thousands of large land holdings, privately owned lands, where the peasants are being exploited and oppressed. And so that's why they had to emancipate or liberate the peasants from various forms of exploitation, even from the imperialist control and domination of the not only the agricultural sector but of the whole Philippine economy. Next slide, please. Yeah, we have this billiards. They have 11,000, more than 11,000 hectares. Yeah, for that non-agricultural use, real estate development, for residential use and commercial use. Yeah, because of their corporations, even water resources in the Philippines are being monopolized now, also of the billiards. Next slide, please. Yeah, the Ramon Ang, with their San Miguel corporations, they are engaged in developing what they call new Manila International Airport in the province of Bulacan. No? And they engage in big ticket infrastructure, quote unquote infrastructure development and expansion of expressways and other infrastructure facilities, the airports and other areas of investments. Next slide, please. Yeah, the Ayala Subels, they are also engaged in buying more and more lands. Expansion of the real estate empire and for energy, what they call this energy development. And now solar energy projects are being what they call this, being financed by big comprador landlords in the country. In the country. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are a number of cases of land grabbing, land and resource grabs. Like in Hacienda Luyulo, it's in Laguna province, south of Manila, and San Jose del Monte, Bulacan. Bulacan is north of Manila. It's a few kilometers from the center of Manila. Next slide, please. Yeah, another example is the land grabbing case and demolition of peasant houses in communities like in Tartaria, in Lupang Ramos, in Cavite, in Dasmariñas, Cavite, where the farmers there, the peasants there, collectively cultivate. They have been collectively cultivating 372 hectares, and more than 50 hectares are now developed. In Anonas, Pampanga, in Angeles City, Pampanga is also in the northern part of Manila, also a few hours drive from Manila, wherein the peasants' residents in that place, even the holders of certificates of land ownership award are being ejected or evicted out of their lands, and their houses demolished. Next slide, please. Yeah, there's also export monopoly plantations. There are 1.2 million plus 1.6 million hectares of current and proposed plantations. No? So next slide, please. The next slides, where the big plantations are being, in sugarcane plantations in Negros, Panay, and Bukidnon islands and provinces, respectively. Next slide, please. Also, the plantation, pineapple plantations under Del Monte and Dole, Philippines, also in Mindanao. Next slide, please. Yeah, also Cavendish banana plantations in southern Mindanao with 47,000 hectares. So that's the breakdown of the big tracts of lands under export crop productions. Next slide, please. And the oil palm plantations also it's in Mindanao, in the island of Mindanao. So in Soxargen, Northern Mindanao, and Caraga, if we add up those data, it will be more than 30 or almost 40,000 hectares of oil palm plantations. Next slide, please. And then with rubber plantations. So tens of thousands of hectares are also devoted to production of rubber. No? So with big plantations. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. Yes. Other large land holdings devoted to mining, large scale mining operations that really in actual in actuality peasants and indigenous peoples are being driven out of their lands, their ancestral lands, and their right to self-determination are being grossly violated in regards of the indigenous peoples. You know. And with 763,000 hectares covered by existing mining permits, you know, in the country. But I think this data, these numbers are we consider it as conservative data. Next slide, please. And other lands and holdings devoted to logging operations. There are 2.5 million hectares covered by logging concessions. I think it is also it's more than 2.5 million if we consider the newly issued logging concessions, you know, to the concessionaires. You are also uh, big local and foreign corporations owned by big compradors and foreign corporations. Next slide, please. Yeah, land use conversion. Before agricultural lands being converted to other uses, there should be first a reclassification of agricultural lands to other uses. So with the data from the Department of Agrarian Reform covering the period of 1988 to 2016, there are 97,592 plus hectares that are being converted to other uses, no? With 64,000, more than 64,500 hectares irrigated rice lands converted to other uses also, as per the data of the National Irrigation Administration in the year 2020. Next slide, please. So, under this Build Better More, BBB, which is now repackaged as a Build Better More under Marcos regime, Marcos administration. So more and more agricultural lands are being converted to big highways, expressways, even productive irrigated rice lands converted into a Central Luzon expressway link project like that. And so that's why more and more agricultural lands are being taken away from agricultural use. That would threaten further the food security of the area, the people in the province or the in regions where this kind of projects are being undertaken. Next slide, please. Yeah, with the PEG and bogus 94, Marcos Jr. has no different no agrarian reform program to agrarian reform. He continues the executive order number 75 issued by former President Duterte with regards to the distribution of lands. Under Marcos Jr., no acquisition and distribution of private agricultural lands. So the project is being implemented by the Department of Agrarian Reform under Marcos Jr. administration. It's what we call this split project, this parcelization of collective certificates of land ownership award into a individual titles of CLOAS. No, no additional acquisition and distribution of private lands under Marcos Jr. Regime. With that administrative order number one, it's really accelerate accelerates the conversion of agricultural lands to other uses. Next slide, please. Yeah, this Marcos Land Reform, Pink Land Reform Program. Marcos administration calls it a new Agrarian Emancipation Act by meaning donation of unpaid land amortizations and even agrees in the 6% interest unpaid by agrarian reform beneficiaries from Marcos Senior administration up to the present. Meaning, though only those agrarian reform beneficiaries who have the what we call this debt, outstanding debt, are covered by this condonation. But with regards to distribution of lands, private agricultural lands, no distribution of private agricultural land. So, based on the data of the Department of Agrarian Reform, there is still more than 500,000 hectares of agricultural lands, of which 92% are privately owned, but they are not, they are remain untouched, meaning no land acquisition and distribution. We call it that balance, the balance for land acquisition distribution. So the DAR rescinded that program. So the DAR now does not implement even its core function or core mandate of acquiring and distributing remaining unacquired and distributed agricultural lands. So that's why the peasants there, the Filipino peasants there remained landless. Next slide, please. So yes, there is an intensifying imperialist plunder and neoliberalism by implementing neoliberal economic policies of deregulation, liberalization, and privatization that really strengthened the corporate control or capture of agriculture with various forms or arrangements like corporative scheme. Implantations, hazardous chemicals are being used, and even conversion of crops from food crops to export crops. So that would further threaten the food security of the country. So with the implementation of agricultural trade liberalization and import liberalization policy, so the Philippines becomes even more dependent on the world market. No? So that's why our campaign and call is to strengthen the agricultural production, not importation of agricultural products that we import, but we can produce locally in sufficient quantity. No, so under the policy of promoting food self-sufficiency, so we have to strengthen our agricultural production to achieve self-sufficiency to ensure a very stable and self-reliant food security for every Filipino citizen. No? So also we are very much concerned with the health hazards and environmental degradation. So the state, the government really neglects the development of our local agriculture. No. Next slide, please. So there's how the corporate capture of agriculture. Next slide, please. To conclude, next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please. So agricultural trade liberalization means ever increasing agricultural deficit and more dependency to imports. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Yeah, it's terrorism, fascism, and lawfare will be shared with us by Maureen Ermitanio. So I skip this these slides. Next slide, please. Maybe the last. Next slide. Lawfare. Yeah. The struggle. So mainly, our struggle, a campaign, mass campaign, is for the implementation of genuine reform and agrarian reform with pre-land distribution as the basic principle and central goal. To emancipate the Filipino peasants from various forms of exploitations and from the political authority of the big landlords. Next slide, please. Implementation of genuine land reform, agrarian reform means solving the fundamental problem of landlessness through breaking up the land monopoly of the big landlords and distributed the lands at no cost to the landless peasants with agricultural cooperativization, with genuine agriculture and rural development, with the implementation also of the and thus national industrialization in the country to build local industries, light industries, up to the heavy industries as the leading factor of developing our national economy. Next, or maybe last slides. Yeah, next slide. Meaning, renewal reform means social justice. Yeah, slides. That's the pictures of where collective land cultivations are being undertaken. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, under PPM, under Bongbong Marcos Jr.'s New Philippines, we call it Bagong Pilipinas. I think the last one, the slide under Bagong Pilipinas. Yeah, under the New Philippines of Bongbong Marcos Jr., no genuine land reform, no national industrialization, no emancipation of peasant class or landless peasants from various forms of feudal or semi-feudal exploitations. Peasants are being highly, deeply indebted, where in the local rice market, the prices of rice, the prices are high, and then the peasants do not have their own production capital, and then the local rice market or our local market are flooded with imported agricultural goods, agricultural products. So we have to magpunyagi and makibaka. So what's the legacy of Marcos Jr.? Uh, After 2 or 3 years of his administration, the legacy well expressed in his surname, Marcos, where letter M stands for militarization of the countryside. Letter A, assassination of political activists. Letter R stands for repression. Letter C, confidential funds. Letter O, what's this? Letter O, oppression. And letter S stands for subservience to foreign interests, primarily to U.S. imperialism. Thank you and good day.
Thank you very much, Kapang, because I think it was very, even if it was quick, it was very in-depth, comprehensive, very rich presentation on the peasant situation and then the agricultural sector. I think that you've showed it's in deepening crisis, the poorest of the poorest, and all the repercussion that it has on health, on all the aspects of life. I think this situation is really, this semi-feudalism is a direct heritage of colonialism and neocolonialism, and we have to pay very focus attention on this. Especially, I'm speaking from Spain, so it's really something that I can see. One of the first slides that you showed, no? I think we have a lot of work to do on that, and I just wanted to also point out that it's very clear in the Philippines, especially in Mindanao, but in all the territory of the Philippines, that the land distribution is really at the heart of the conflict. If you have 7 out of 10 peasant landless, it cannot work. And it's really, it strikes everyone who travels, who is in the Philippines, especially in Mindanao, this macro plantation with people with no rights, with persecuted people just because they are reivindicating their rights. And it's the heart of the conflict, but a genuine land reform is also at the very center of justice and peace. So I think that you've presented this very clearly, and maybe it's possible to have this presentation afterwards. I hope so, because it's very in-depth and very, very comprehensive. Now I'm gonna give the floor to our next speaker. She will talk about the international humanitarian law and militarization. It's very connected to the previous presentation, and the concept in the context of the peasant struggle in the Philippines. Maureen Mau Ermitaño, she's a campaign and advocacy officer of KMP, and she's the national coordinator of Tanggol Magsasaka Defend Farmers. Please, the floor is yours, and welcome Mau Maureen Ermitaño.
Yes, good day to our compatriots, friends and comrades, and to our participants in the Zoom room and to all ICHRP members. Tanggol Magsasaka or Defend Farmers is a network of peasant advocates who monitor and document peasant human rights violations. At present, violations of human rights and international humanitarian law among farmers, fisherfolk, and agricultural workers persist to worsen under the current U.S. Marcos administration. The state is weaponizing the law to criminalize and vilify the genuine struggle of farmers for land, food, and justice. Unconstitutional laws ratified under the previous Duterte regime, such as the Anti-Terrorism Law and the Executive Order Number 70 or the Whole of the Nation approach, which created the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, led to wanton violation of peasants' rights. In the Philippines, farmers and rural sectors suffer the most under the current regime. We demand a stop to the attacks against farmers and the peasant masses. In many parts of the country, farmers cannot freely go to their farms because their communities are highly militarized and deployed with battalions of battle-ready soldiers. The capacity and capabilities of local peasant associations are clipped when their leaders and members are being red tagged and forced to surrender. Farmers are being terrorized day and night by the Philippine state and its paid mercenaries. Let me share a few statistics on Philippine peasants' human rights situation. Next slide. According to Karapatan Monitor's latest data, 68.57% of all extrajudicial killing victims are farmers or comes from the peasant class. 46.67% of those who were forcibly disappeared or desaparecidos are peasants. And 755 political prisoners in the Philippines, or 90% of them comes from the peasant sector. These are all violations of international humanitarian laws. And these are not isolated cases. This is the reality for farmers across the Philippines. Under the U.S. Marcos regime's counterinsurgency program, supported by the United States government through funding and loans. The Philippines is currently the biggest recipient of U.S. military aid in Southeast Asia. It will also receive some $500 million in additional military assistance over the next 5 years. This is to enhance the armed forces of the Philippines' capacity to conduct intelligence, cyber, and combat operations that terrorizes the people in the course of the Marcos Jr. regime's stepped-up counterinsurgency drive. Violation of international humanitarian laws also persist. There have been documented bombings and aerial strikes in the provinces of Masbate, Nueva Vizcaya, Nueva Ecija, Aurora, Cagayan in Luzon, and also in the provinces of Iloilo, Negros Occidental, and Oriental Mindoro. These bombings affect thousands of residents in the countryside. Based on the data from AGHAM, or the Advocates of Science and Technology for the People, Cagayan province in northern Luzon was bombed 9 times. Oriental Mindoro and southern Luzon was bombed 8 times, and Bukidnon in Mindanao was bombed 7 times. These bombings affect communities. These displaced families, disrupt livelihood, and cause heavy civilian casualties. Bombings also cause damage to flora and fauna, especially when targets are in those key biodiversity areas. The statistics that I've showed are not just mere numbers. Every statistic represents faces, names, and lives. Militarization has a significant impact on the livelihood and lives of farmers. It brings fear, trauma, destruction of farms and livelihood, and other human rights violations. In the first half of this year, Tanggol Magsasaka joined several fact-finding missions to document human rights violations. Let me share a few data. In Mobo, Masbate, in Bicol, farmer Francis Francisco, 39 years old, was shot by riding in tandem while he was gathering firewood with his 11-year-old child. The suspected killers of Francis Francisco belongs to the battalion deployed in Mobo. Francis sustained 9 gunshot wounds in different parts of his body, some in his head, chest, back, side, and knee. Before the killing, Francis was a victim of red tagging, and he was frequently visited by the soldiers who accused him of being associated with the NPA. Also in Masbate, last September 2023, 12 armed plainclothes CIDG personnel illegally raided and arrested elderly peasant woman Dolores Rapsing Bilibit. She's 72 years old and bedridden due to stroke. She was charged with fabricated charges related to the death of the Absalon family in June 2021. Lola Dolores is a respected leader and former barangay tanod in her community. She has only been examined by a doctor once since her imprisonment, and it revealed that she has a heart condition. And her medical situation continues to worsen in detention, not only due to her illness, but also due to the poor prison conditions. During a visit in early this year, Lola Dolores' daughter found her covered in bed sores. So that is the situation endured by many of the political prisoners in the Philippines, languishing in jails and experiencing inhumane conditions. In Aurora province in Luzon, a series of indiscriminate firings and aerial strikes occurred in May 2024. The aerial strikes was conducted by the 91st Infantry Battalion, allegedly against the NPA, but it was directed in a populated civilian area. According to the Department of Social Work and Development, a total of 3,633 families or 12,814 individuals from 14 villages in the towns of Dipaculao and Maria Aurora were affected. This series of bombings and airstrikes has caused extreme fear and anxiety among farmers and residents. One of the victims is Angelita Gordolan Capinlac, 61 years old, a resident of Barangay Maria Aurora. According to her, the soldiers from the battalion refrained farmers from going to their farms, claiming the presence of New People's Army in the area. This has led to severe hunger and loss of farmers' livelihood. There is a short video clip, direct testimonial from the farmer from Aurora.
Sobra pong napakahirap para po sa aming mamamayan ng buong Aurora. Kasi po, pagising namin ng umaga, nandun na po sa aming dibdib at puso ang pangamba na ang mga military ay pinabawalan na po ang mga kalalakihan na magkaingin sa apokabundukan ng Aurora. Hindi na po nakakapagtrabaho ang mga kalalakihan. Paano po mabubuhay ang kanilang mga sari-sariling pamilya? Nangangamba po kami at natatakot na baka kahit anong oras, baka bigla na lang pong magbaba sila ng bomba. Ay hindi naman po nila kayang bayaran ng bawat isang buhay ng mamamayan kung ano man po ang mangyayari. Dahil ang bawat buhay ng isang tao hindi kayang bayaran ng salapi.
All right, the farmer Angelita Capinlac said they are living in fear because they are threatened with bombings, and the farmers in their area cannot go to the farms, and so she's appealing for aid and assistance. In San Jose del Monte, Bulacan, last June 18, 2024, the house of KMP Secretary General and Tanggol Magsasaka spokesperson Ronnie Manalo was illegally searched, ransacked, and planted with firearms and explosives by the PNP SOCO and the 80th Infantry Battalion of the Philippine Army. This was done without anyone present in the house, without a barangay official, and no search warrant. Armed military personnel took Ronnie's wife, Lina Manalo, and out of fear, Lina Manalo was forced to sign an inventory of the supposedly seized items from their house, and the soldiers demanded that Ronnie surrender. Ronnie Manalo has long been a victim of threats and red tagging from state forces due to his active involvement in the land struggle of farmers at the Araneta Estates. Araneta Estates is a controversial land holding being land grabbed by presidential brother-in-law Greggy Araneta. Kalina suffered a heart attack while giving her testimony before the Commission on Human Rights last June 25. She died at the hospital 2 days later. On the same day, in a different barangay, Paradise 3, also in San Jose del Monte, Bulacan, more than 20 armed soldiers surrounded the house of peasant leader Cecil Rapis. She is the chairperson of the Bulacan Farmers Alliance. Now, both Ronnie and Cecil cannot return to their communities due to fear for their safety. Because of this, they can no longer tend to their crops and their farms. And farming communities in San Jose del Monte are now under militarization, with soldiers encamped in civilian facilities like in village halls, schools, and church. This is the life and experience of Filipino farmers. And this is the result of the continuing counterinsurgency program of the U.S. Marcos regime following the previous regime's lead under the NTF-ELCAC. And this is supported by the U.S. counterinsurgency program, or the COIN. Instead of heeding the plight of farmers and strengthening domestic agriculture, the Philippine government has weaponized the laws and used this against farmers, fisher folk, peasant women, agricultural workers, and the rural youth. We call on all our democracy-loving compatriots, especially workers, human rights defenders, indigenous peoples, advocates, church peoples, environment defenders, and all sectors here and abroad to support the Stand with Farmers campaign and stand with farmers who are fighting against landlessness, injustice, impunity, and the weaponization of the law in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it was very informative. But as you said, this is terrible data, but this is not mere numbers. This is the reality for the farmers. Just because they are reivindicating their fundamental rights, human rights, rights to land, they are criminalized, they are persecuted, they live under constant threat. And you've showed it, it's a very well-organized system with the NTF-ELCAC institutionalizing the counterinsurgency with the complicity of the US. So I think it was very informative, and I will quickly give the floor to our next speaker because it's totally in line with this presentation. She is Beverly Longit. She will talk about the situation of indigenous peoples communities because they are also affected, as you know, by heavy militarization, bombings, and other state-sponsored offensives against the practice of their right to self-determination. Beverly, she's the co-convener of the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, IPM-SDL. Please welcome Mrs. Beverly Longin. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Claire. Gawis ay agaw kandat ako abin. Warm greetings to all. Thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak on the issue of state conducted bombings and the situation of the Philippine indigenous peoples. Militarization in the Philippines has taken various forms, serving both as a, next slide please, serving both as a counterinsurgency measure and corporate or investment defense. It is based on Executive Order number 70 or the National Internal Security Policy of the state. And this institutionalizes the whole of nation approach, meaning it involves local government units, government agencies, state security forces, the police, the military, and even civil society formations for counterinsurgency purposes, and also to enforce the government neoliberal policies, especially on energy, mining, commercial plantations, infrastructure, communications, etc. Militarization also includes troop deployment in so-called red areas, or what governments normally consider as strongholds, no, of the New People's Army. And these are also areas that are usually encroached upon by destructive projects. Thus, the military would encamp in communities. They would create paramilitary groups or civilians, no, arming them, but they do civilians that are armed and are mandated by the military to perform military functions. They also set up checkpoints in communities and the use of bombings and drones. No? It also leads to criminalization, red tagging, and terrorist labeling of indigenous peoples, organizations, activists, and advocates. So it is within this context that we shall discuss the issue of bombings and militarization in the country. Adding to the statistics that was shared by Mao earlier, in the previous Duterte administration, human rights monitors have documented at least 10,000 families, approximately around 500,000 individuals, to have been forcibly evacuated due to militarization and bombings. According to the Armed Forces of the Philippines data alone from 2017 to 2022, they showed that 591 bombs, 489 artillery shells were utilized, using around 74 rounds of aerial strafing, and 56 bombing incidents in 2021 alone. We couldn't get any other data for the succeeding years. However, since Bongbong Marcos assumed presidency, Karapatan has documented around 43,000 victims of forced evacuation due to bombings. 11 of these bombing incidents were reported to have been done on ancestral lands and territories of indigenous peoples. 4 of these bombing incidents alone were done in the Cordillera region, which is my hometown and the homeland of the Igorots, indigenous peoples of that region. But it is also disheartening to see that while the Philippine government has recently allocated around $35 billion for its military modernization, it has only set aside around 5 billion pesos for new classrooms, and around 28 billion pesos for health facilities for this year. If you see, the imbalance would really suggest a skewed prioritization towards the defense at the expense of essential social services. If we look at international human rights standards, militarization and bombings challenge actually rights that are protected by international standards, specifically the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and of international humanitarian laws. Specifically on the declaration, Article 30, paragraphs 1 and 2 would prohibit the conduct of any military activities in indigenous peoples' lands and territories without their free prior informed consent, or without a justified public interest for it to be done. And then if we look also at global agreements, national laws, and other practices, this would also violate the same standards. So projects like mines, dams, oil exploration, even tourism, frequently proceed without the free prior informed consent of indigenous peoples, or FPIC. So the right to free prior informed consent does not only involve projects, it also involves and should be done even with military activities or any activity for that matter in our lands and territories. But if later on, I'll be showing you that if in cases there have been so-called free prior informed consent, most of these were done under duress or were facilitated by state security forces or government agencies like the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. So the bombings and militarization are also done to safeguard the interests of bureaucrat capitalists or the local politicians who more often than not control the national economy and industries, as we have seen by the presentation of Kapaeng. They are also in members of the Senate and the local legislative bodies. Private corporations and multinational corporations often operate in indigenous lands and territories. So it is quite alarming, the intersection of militarization and corporate or business interests, but there needs to be a further dissection of the link between militarization and economic interest, and this has also needs to be exposed. Now, in terms of corporate and state interests, military power is not solely to suppress indigenous people's movement for self-determination and liberation, but it also undermines the territorial integrity of these communities. This disregard leads to dispossession and significantly impacts our ways of life. So if we look at an incident in October 2022, the military indiscriminately fired on the rivers, sugarcane fields, and forests in Himamaylan Negros. Himamaylan Negros is also home to indigenous peoples, and this area is now a target for government and private corporations for exploitation of resources and plunder of the lands. These are very fertile and vast lands. In the same manner that last year of March in Kalinga, a province in the Cordillera, also suffered bombings by the military, while the military in Kalinga even claimed that they did not use conventional bombs, but so-called white phosphorus bombs. This is an incendiary material banned under international humanitarian law because of its toxic effect on lives and the environment, and also because it really burns very fast and destroys in a matter of seconds a big land area. And the area that has been bombed is also the site for several proposed energy projects in the region. So aside from this economic interest in indigenous peoples' lands and territories, with military bilateral agreements like the recently approved Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, between the Philippine government and the United States, it would intensify militarization. In fact, the areas that have been recently bombed that has been mentioned, like Cagayan, that has been mentioned by Mao to have been bombed 9 times, is home to 2 of the 4 EDCA sites that has been recently approved. Aside from this, militarization and bombings would also not only cause physical harm, but also impacts the natural landscape of these areas. It results to habitat loss and environmental problems like air and water contamination, noise disturbance, and greenhouse gas emissions. In Cagayan, it is also a, how do you call it, a protected site because it is home to a local bird species that is near extinction, in the same manner that another area in Mindanao, Malaybalay, Bukidnon, is also a protected ecosystem that services or provides water to more than 100 households. These incidents would show how militarization and bombings would threaten, disturb, and disrupt both the environment and the communities affected. In fact, this exacerbates the already landless situation of indigenous peoples. If you look at the report presentation of KPN earlier in Mindanao on the coverage of these commercial plantations for pineapples, bananas, and the like, most of these are actually ancestral lands that were grabbed from the indigenous peoples, Galuman. And now they are living within the periphery of these commercial plantations. So aside from the physical, ecological consequences of bombing, of course, there is also, and we have started to document this, the psychological impact of bombings and militarization. And because this has caused trauma, it has created really an atmosphere of fear within the communities. And in cases where consent has to be done, it has undermined free, prior, informed consent. In the cases of women and children, there have been reported cases also of miscarriages and premature birth, rising due to bombings. Aside from that, this has also caused displacement and other forms of human rights violations, specifically causing internal displacement and forced evacuation. On the issue of women, children, and girls, the pervasive violence against indigenous women and girls is a grave human rights concern. There have been several reported incidents in relation to this, but due to stigma, few would really report these crimes, and those who do would often face indifference or retaliation from authorities. Victims and their families would frequently encounter threat, harassment, and intimidation, or even coerced into monetary settlement. There are documented cases of military personnel abducting, marrying, and abandoning indigenous women once they are transferred or deployed to other areas. These actions violate the rights of indigenous women and children to be protected from violence and discrimination, specifically under the Convention to Eliminate Discrimination Against Women. And there has been a clear recommendation in relation to protecting the rights of indigenous women and girls with regards to this covenant. Another impact also that I think that has to be looked into would be the disruption of economic activities and destruction of livelihood, because militarization and bombings would really destroy the livelihood of communities. In many cases, soldiers would impose curfew hours, preventing indigenous peasants or farmers from tending their rice fields early in the morning before the rise of the sun. Hamleting is also being done, or preventing community members from leaving the community even for work, or allowing them to leave, provided that they should be able to return within designated number of hours. In Mindanao, they have reported that soldiers will allow them to leave their communities provided that they return within 4 hours. If they did not return within the designated time, they are automatically what they call this branded as members of the New People's Army. it is also very absurd that the military also controls the volume of food supplies for families. The military imposes this restriction on the false belief that if there are excess in food provision, these are usually meant to support the new people's army. And then if the communities fail to comply with the impositions of the soldiers in the community, this would lead to grave human rights violations. So the disruption of economic activities, destruction of livelihood, and the prevention of work due to militarization and bombing are also human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law, especially that this would lead to impoverishment of communities, states of hunger, and violation of their rights to decent livelihood. In these cases of bombings, and militarization, we would see that militarization actually targets civilians, unarmed civilians at that, on the unsupported claim that they are members of the New People's Army. Bombings are also targeted while not directly in the residential areas, but now we have seen that they are bombing either the forest lands or the farms of indigenous communities as part of their counterinsurgency. But the farms or the forest are also places or sources of livelihood and food for the communities, especially in the countrysides. And these are also prohibited under international humanitarian law. Now, in cases where we are successfully able to reach the communities, even our humanitarian initiatives to provide relief is abstracted or prevented by the military. For instance, we were able to we were able to conduct an initial fact-finding in the bombing incident in the boundary areas of Kalinga, Ilocos, and Abra, and also to provide relief operations. But the military did not allow us to give the food supplies to the communities that have evacuated. They only agreed to do so when the local government intervened to allow us to do the distribution. So in conclusion, militarization and bombings have profound impact on indigenous peoples or the affected communities. It violates our rights, it displaces communities, and causes significant ecological and psychological harm. It brings misery, it brings suffering to communities and families, and this must stop. So in line with this, let us call to heighten our advocacy, calling for the protection of indigenous rights and adherence to international standards is also urgently needed. Of course, we should call for the respect of all human rights. And as an end, as an alternative is to we call, as far as IPMSDL, indigenous peoples organizations and other organizations in the Philippines to support the resumption of peace talks between the government and the Communist Party of the Philippines, the New People's Army, and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines to find a political settlement for the civil war in the country. This is a better alternative to red tagging, terrorist designation, desaparecidos, threat, harassment, intimidation, militarization, and bombings. Again, thank you for the organizers for this opportunity. Agyaman apo, kada kayo amin. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Beverly. I think it was a brilliant presentation. I have nothing more to add. I'm just hearing your call for the respect of human rights, the respect of ancestors' lands. It's so violent, the methods of bombing, this harassment, just in the end for land grabbing. I mean, it all boils down to land grabbing, and militarization, as you've shown, is part of this counterinsurgency strategy in blatant violation of human rights international human rights standards and international humanitarian law. I think this connection that you've made between militarization and economical interest is very powerful and very interesting. And we see that the objective, the goal of this is the mere destruction of the livelihood of the indigenous people, to erase this way of life, this ancestors' indigenous way of having this connection to land. And I think that we definitely have to internationally give support to the respect of human rights, of all human rights, of indigenous people's rights, and a political solution to the conflict through peace talks. So thank you very much for this, again, brilliant presentation. We are running out of time, so I'm going to quickly give the floor to our next part of the program. It's a video message from Ronnie Manalo. He's the Secretary General of KMP. He's a longtime peasant leader of the Alliance of Peasants in Bulacan, Alianza en Magbukit sa Bulacan. And he's currently facing fabricated charges of illegal possession of firearms and explosives. Thank you for listening to this video of Ronnie Manalo.
Magandang araw mga kasama, mga kaibigan at mga taga-suporta. Nakalahok ngayon sa ating webinar bilang bahagi ng ating talakayan kaugnay sa mga maiinit na isyong pinakaharap ng mga magsasakang Pilipino. At bilang build up na rin ng ating kampanyang magsasaka ngayong Oktubre at pagunita sa mahigit 5 dekada na pagpapatupad ng mga huwad na reforma sa lupa mula sa panahon ng diktadurang Marcos hanggang sa kasalukuyang panahon ng puppet na rehimeng Bongbong Marcos Jr. Ang mahabang 5 dekada na pagpapatupad di umano ng reforma sa lupa mula sa panahon ng dating diktador na tinatawag natin PD-27 na naglalayon di umano na magbigay ng lupa sa mga magsasaka, palayain di umano ang mga magsasaka mula sa pagkatali sa lupa. Pero pagkatapos ng 5 dekada na natiling wala pa ring lupa ang mga magsasaka, nasa kamay pa rin ng iilang mga Panginoong may lupa ang malawak na lupain sa bansa. Nasa kamay pa rin ng mga multinational corporation, ng mga agribusiness at mga mining corporation, real estate developers ang malawak na mga lupaing agrikultural. Laganap pa rin ang pagpapatalsik, pagpapalaya sa mga magsasaka at mga katutubo sa kanilang lupang sinasaka tinitirhan, mga lupang ninuno dahil sa tatamaan ng mga mining at saka pangangamkam para sa plantasyon ng mga produktong mga pananim na pang-export katulad ng palm oil, guma at iba pa. Sa kasalukuyang rehimen ng bagong Marcos ay wala pa rin programa para sa tunay na reforma sa lupa. Ang pinirmahan kamakailan karang taon na New Agrarian Emancipation Act of 2023 na naglalayon din di umano na palayain ang mga magsasaka, ikondon o patburahin ang mga utang ng mga magsasaka mula sa mga hindi nabayarang mga amortisasyon sa lupa mula ng inaward sa kanila CLP, PLOA, dahil sa kawalang suporta ng gobyerno para sa mga magsasaka matapos ipamahagi ang mga PLOA at CLT ay hindi nakapagbayad ng mga magsasaka ng kanilang amortisasyon. Ang layunin di umano nung condonation program ng kasalukuyang rehimeng Marcos ay burahin ang mga pagkakautang ng mga magsasaka. Pero ang katotohanan ay wala na sa kamay ng mga magsasaka ang mga lupang inaward sa kanila sa pamamagitan ng CL Certificate of Land Transfer, Certificate of Land Ownership Award. Ang isang halimbawa, nakatanggap ako ng Certificate of Condonation nitong September 12 dahil daw sa hindi ako nakapagbayad ng aking amortisasyon sa lupang inaward sa akin mula noong 2004. Pero ang totoo, wala na sa akin yung luwa. Kinansila na yung aming mga luwa, binawi na yung aming lupang sinasaka at in-exempt sa saklaw ng pamamahagi ng lupa sa ilalim ng programa ng Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program ng gobyerno Aquino. Sa makatwid, ang 5 dekada mahigit na pagpapatupad ng reforma sa lupa mula sa Presidential Decree 27 hanggang sa kasalukuyang rehimen mula sa Ferdinand Marcos Sr. at Conrado Estrella Sr. na siyang naging Ministry of Agrarian Reform Secretary noong panahon na yon, noong 1972, patungo sa kasalukuyang rehimeng ng bagong Marcos, Bongbong Marcos Jr. at katandim din ang apo ng Conrado Estrella na si Conrado Estrella III. Siya rin naman ang kalihim ngayon ng Department of Agriculture, Department of Agrarian Reform. Parihong, kung tutuusin, parihong ang pinagmamalaki nilang ligasiya ng Marcos at Conrado ay ligasiya ng panlilinlang sa mga magsasaka. 5 dekada mahigit na panlilinlang sa mga magsasaka na pinapaniwala ang mga magsasaka na maging kanila ang lupa nilang sinasaka. Pero sa katotohanan ay wala pa rin lupa ang mga magsasaka hanggang sa ngayon. Laganap pa rin ang mga land grabbing. Laganap pa rin ang land reclassification, conversion. Laganap ang mga marahas na pagpapalaya sa mga magsasaka sa kanilang lupang sinasaka. Andyan ang sa pilitang pagpapalikas dahil binobomba ng mga militar ang kanilang mga komunidad. Andyan yung pagpapalayas ng mga pribadong mga gwardya ng mga pribadong korporasyon, mga gwardya at mga goons ng mga real estate developers. Ang mga lehitimong organisasyon ng mga magsasaka ay minamarkahang front ng terorismo, front ng CPP-NPA. Ang mga lehitimong kahilingan ng mga magsasaka para sa tunay na reforma sa lupa ay tinutugunan ng pamahalaan ng militarisasyon ng pandarahas. Ang mga lehitimong kahilingan ay ginagawang kriminal. Ang mga leader at mga kasapit ng mga magsasaka, mga organisasyon ng mga magsasaka ay sinasampahan ng mga gawa-gawang kaso. Dinadahas, pinipilit na pagpasukuin at pinapaaminin na sila ay mga taga-suporta ng NPA para patahimikin. Ang lehitimong organisasyon at karapatan ng mga magsasaka na mag-organisa, magpahayag ng kanilang karaingan sa pamahalaan ay tinutugunan ng terorismo ng Estado. Ang isang halimbawa na malinaw ay ako mismo ay biktima ng gawa-gawang kaso at pangdidipit ng militar at ng Estado. Mula 2012 ko'y patuloy na tinatakot, hinahanap ng mga nagpapakilalang ahente ng militar na naka-ahente ng tandem hanggang nitong 2022. Ilang ulit na pinuntahan ako sa bahay ng mga armadong nakasibilyan na hindi napakilala at hindi pa nasiyahan. Noong Hunyo 18, 2024, illegal na hinalubog ang aking bahay at tinaniman ng mga baril, bala, granada. Pagkatapos, ako'y sinampahan ng kasong illegal possession of firearm ammunition, explosive at paglabag sa Anti-Terror Act 2020. Makalipas ang isang linggo ay namatay ang aking asawa dahil sa atake sa puso, bunga ng matinding trauma at depresyon dahil sa nangyaring pagalubog sa aming bahay. Ito lahat ay bahagi ng sistematikong kampanya ng kasalukuyang rehimen at ng militar sa pamamagitan ng NTF-ELCAC para siraan, para pilayin ang mga lehitimong organisasyon ng mga magsasaka para patahimikin. Ako ay kasalukuyang kalihim ng kilusang magbubukid ng Pilipinas. Ang pagsampa ng gawa-gawang kaso sa akin ay nakatuon sa pagwasak sa kilusang magbubukid ng Pilipinas at sa lokal na mga samahang magsasaka, partikular sa aming lugar. Ang mga komunidad ng mga magsasaka sa aming lugar ay tinayuan ng kampo. Pilit na pinapatawag sa mga pulong-pulong ang mga magsasaka at pinapaamin na sila ay supporter ng CPP-NPA. Sila ay pinapapirma sa waiver sa mga sinumpa ang salaysay na sila ay kusang babalik loob at para linisin ang kanilang pangalan. Ito'y hindi nila kusang ginagawa, kundi dahil ginawa nila ito dahil sa pamimilit ng militar. Ang mga magsasaka ngayong Oktubre ay maglulunsad ng malawakang pagkilos at paglalantad sa kung ano ang kasalukuyang kalagayan ng mga magsasaka at kung kanino naglilingkod ang kasalukuyang puppet na rehimen na nagpapatupad ng mga neoliberal na mga patakaran sa agrikultura, sa ekonomiya at saka sa iba pang aspeto ng lipunan. Tunay na panawagan ay ang pagpapatupad ng tunay na reforma sa lupa. Ang kawalan ng lupa ng mga magsasaka ay kawalan ng hustisyang panlipunan. Kaya makatarungan ang kahilingan ng mga magsasaka na ipatupad ang tunay na reforma sa lupa. Itaguyod natin at palakasin ang panawagan sa buong mundo ng lupa para sa mga magsasaka. Ibagsak ang feudalismo, imperialismo at mabuhay ang pandaigdigang pagkakaisa ng mga mamamayan at mga magsasaka. Maraming salamat at magandang araw sa inyong lahat.
Well, I think again it was a very powerful testimony of a system which makes victims of state terrorism for just legitimately calling for a genuine agrarian reform. And I really think that we must strengthen our solidarity, international solidarity with the peasant movement. I'm gonna give the floor to our chairperson of ICHRP Global Council, Peter Murphy. He's gonna deliver a response and a solidarity message. Peter's camera is not working, so we're gonna hear your voice, Peter, and I'm giving the floor to you immediately.
Thank you very much, Claire. And thank you very much to Kapayeng, Mao, Beverly, and Ronnie for what they've given us in these presentations, the information, the insights, the personal experience on the peasant and indigenous people situation in the Philippines, and the level of militarization and violation of international humanitarian law, shocking level. So this month and every month, ICHRP stands firmly with the struggle of the Filipino peasants for genuine land reform and with the indigenous people's fight to protect their ancestral domains. So landlessness is one of the root causes of the armed conflict, as we can really see from the presentations. We know that the free distribution of land to the peasants was agreed back in 2017 in the draft Comprehensive Agreement on Social and Economic Reforms in the now blocked peace talks between the NDFP and the GRP. We call, along with you, for the peace talks to resume as soon as possible and for this genuine land reform to be formally agreed as soon as possible. ICHRP salutes all the struggles for land reform, such as the Bungkalan and Bagsakan movements, and we totally condemn the military and police attacks against the peasants and indigenous peoples. The case of the brutal murder of Randall Echanes by state forces in 2020 was highlighted at the International People's Tribunal in May this year. So ICHRP tracks the human rights situation, and we see that the Marcos Jr. regime, supported by the United States, is guilty of egregious war crimes. We commit to continued international protest and condemnation and action for genuine accountability for the perpetrators of war crimes and violations of human rights. The Philippines remains such a rich country in mineral and natural resources, and really in its people, especially the peasants and indigenous peoples. But the injustice is rooted in the unequal power and unequal land ownership systems in the country. These only serve the Philippines' ruling elite and the foreign corporate interests. The Armed Forces of the Philippines, which is the primary agency carrying out the attacks against peasants and indigenous peoples, continues to be supported, trained, funded, and directed by the United States government. Despite the current terrible human rights situation, the US has actually increased its military bases in the Philippines, now up to 9, and also increased military aid by $500 million. It also conducts hundreds of military exercises all over the Philippines. By strengthening the Philippine military and police in this way, the US and its allies are making worse the repression of the Filipino peasants and the indigenous peoples in their struggle for land. As a global formation, ICHRP is particularly concerned by the way many countries across the world, Canada, Australia, Spain, France, the UK, Japan, and Germany, are also joining the US agenda in the Philippines and using the lands of the poor and marginalized for counterterrorism training and for military positioning for a war against China. ICHRP calls to people all over the world to be in genuine solidarity and to support the Filipino peasants and indigenous peoples, especially in this month of October. We really want everyone who can to hold some form of action in solidarity on October 21 and to amplify the peasant mobilization in Manila. We can urge people also to give financial support to this movement through our online donation system, which is at ichirp.net/peasant fundraiser. The people need funds to get to the big rally in Manila. And finally, we urge anyone and everyone to get involved long-term in the solidarity movement for the Philippines by joining organizations, especially ICHRP. You can also support ICHRP with monthly donations through our website. So stop the attacks on peasants, stop the attacks on the indigenous peoples, support the Filipino people's call for genuine land reform, oppose state terrorism in the Philippines. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this insightful and powerful solidarity message. Obviously, from ICHRP Europe, we are totally committed to this struggle, and we will keep doing the work and the fight. Now we have a short break for a cultural performance. We're gonna watch a video from Barangay Pesante Combo. See if that's, yeah, thanks.
Hindi namin kayo titigilan, hindi namin kayo titigilan, hindi namin kayo titigilan, hindi namin kayo titigilan. Bakit ko kayo titigilan? Kung patuloy ninyong pinapahirapan ng mga magsasaka at dinudusta ang masa, hindi namin kayo titigilan. Bakit ko kayo Kinukulong at dinudukot ang mga aktivista. Nasa inyo'y lumalaban. Hindi namin kayo titigilan. Bakit ko kayo titigilan? Kung patuloy kayong sunod-sunuran sa mga sakim na dayuhan na tumarambong sa yaman ng mahal kong bayan. Hindi ko kayo titigilan. Hindi namin kayo titigilan.
Napakatagal na kung pangyayari at nararanasan ng mamamayan ng kahirapan, kawalan ng justisya at panlipunan, paggawa ng sasakalaman ng matatagal sa ilan, pinagsabawalan ng lupa at mga kaaksulat ng mga pagsasamantala ng ating.
At may palanong tirano na nakaupo sa palasyo. Hanggang mga nangkais ay walang kapangyarihan. Hindi ko kayo titigilan. Hindi namin 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 kayo titigilan.
Well, thank you very much to Barangay Pesante Combo because it was a very rousing performance. And I think that now we can formally begin this Q&A space. We are running out of time, so I suggest that we have a few minutes of Q&A. You can either unmute your microphone or type a question in the chat box. I will try to keep track of it. If you can please just specify who among the speakers your question or questions are directed to. Thank you. And let's see if we have any question. Can I see? I hope I'm not missing anyone because there are many people connected. I think that if you have a question, just please unmute your microphone. It's going to be easier. Any question or comment, reflection, solidarity call? I'm sorry because I don't see any hand. Go ahead. I thought there was a question, but maybe not.
Now there's a
Okay,
question.
I have
Yeah.
questions in the chat. Okay. So from ICHRP, how can organizations from other parts of the world can help in the campaigns? And from Zarina to any one of the speakers, how can the international community be more effective in raising the calls and campaigns of the Filipino people other than conducting webinars such as this? Thank you, Zarina. Peter, do you want to take the floor?
Okay, thank you, Claire. I think maybe to both questions we can do the answer. The targets can be at the national level. I mean, we're having here a multi-country webinar, and it's a basic source of information, but we can take this information and take it to our own organizations in our own cities and countries, and in particular target those political people who are responsible for foreign policy in your country, to make them really see the huge violations of international law taking place in the Philippines. And every country has a responsibility actually to do something to change this situation. So of course it's very difficult to make them do that, but that, you know, by face to face and organizations making decisions and calls, we can increase the pressure. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Another speaker from the Philippines who would like to also give an answer to the question? Because I think it's very important that from outside we share our ways of calling for international solidarity and organizing not only webinars. For example, in Barcelona, we had an international conference organized on the peace processes and peace negotiations 2 weeks ago, raising awareness on the situation in the Philippines that is not so well known, let's say, and we managed to have more than 100 persons in a conference room, and we had an exchange of perspectives and views between the Colombian peace process, the Guatemalan peace process, the Irish peace process, the South African peace process, and the Filipino peace process. It was one of the big activities that we conducted. You can do many other things, but I think it's also interesting to hear from our comrades and colleagues from the Philippines how they see this international solidarity. Maybe Mao, you want to take the floor, or Mariano?
Claire, yeah, this is Kapay. I think there's a need really to further strengthen and advance forward our solidarity and our campaigns for genuine agrarian reform, food sovereignty, and peasants' rights. That's one of the examples of how can we have the support and solidarity of the peasants, organizations, people's movements in other parts of the world. And for the immediate, I think we are inviting you to them to join us in this coming this another 2 study sessions, no? On the topic of imperialist wars and aggression and its impact on the peasants, indigenous peoples also, and other toiling masses in the rural areas, no? And the topic on on militarism or fascism and the curtailment of democratic rights and fundamental freedoms, with the focus to the situation or and the campaigns, the anti-feudal, anti-fascist, and anti-imperialist campaigns of the peasants and other toiling masses. No? So and also we are hopeful that this October, as a global month of solidarity with peasants, will be successful. Yes, and also I think we have to develop a South-South learning exchanges also with the team promoting people's arts and culture, advancing advocacy for genuine agrarian reform, food sovereignty, and peasants' rights. No? With the focus to how to defend and advance forward our campaigns to advance forward our struggle to defend the rights of peasants and even the civil political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, which are really universal, interdependent, and indivisible rights. So I think, and we invite more and more organization of peasants, campesinos, even and other organizations from Latin America, for instance, and Africa, to become a member of Peasant Commission, the Commission number 6 of the International League of People's Struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Bakapeng. There is a message actually in okay. Someone was asking, saying that we would love to attend these study sessions, and if we can add to that the links. I think the links have been added. We have a question a little here. Okay, sorry. A question from Norna. International humanitarian law, as is mentioned in this webinar, is also known as law of war or of armed conflict. With the attacks clearly presented today against peasants, we are assuming war is going on in the Philippines between peasants and military. Please elaborate why the war is happening and how do we support the peasants in this conflict? There is no speaker specified, so I think any of them can answer.
Okay.
Peter?
I'll get started. I think it's good to be clear. I think there's a war at the International People's Tribunal. It was defined as a war between the forces of the Philippines and those of the New People's Army. New People's Army politically has been represented in negotiation by the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. So the violations of international humanitarian law, one of them is the lack of discrimination. That is that civilians, not armed combatants, are being killed and otherwise injured and their interests damaged by the armed forces action. That is the Philippine military action. That's what we saw today in the presentations. So that's why it's a breach of the law. So why is the war happening? I think we saw it, the landlessness, the poverty. It's a political reality, a social reality, a very, very painful problem in the society in the Philippines with a deep history. And how do we support the peasants in this conflict? I think that the speakers gave many good hints. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I don't know if Mao or Beverly want to add something on that. I'm sorry, I have a text from Mao replying the previous questions. The Filipino government and other countries are taking part in the Indo-Pacific strategy and agreements with countries like Canada, Australia, etc. Organizations can launch campaigns to expose, oppose, and lobby against militarism and IHL violations resulting from these US-led agreements. If you want to add something on this, Mao, I assume that you prefer by text, but if you want to take the floor, or Beverly. Is there any other question? I don't see any questions on the chat. If someone has a question, you can raise your microphone. You can turn your microphone on. And if there is no, okay, there is another question. Thank you. From Sofia, Alpas, Filipinas. As we see with the Gaza genocide, violations of international law don't necessarily lead to action, especially when it benefits imperialist interests. How do we move forward from here? Important question. Peter, I don't know if, again, you can take the floor, maybe.
Well, I think, thanks, Claire, and thanks, Sophia. You've spelt out the problem. We can see that in the Gaza situation, even though it's blatant, everybody in the world, except for a few, seem to be able to understand that it's absolutely illegal and wrong what's going on, but nothing is stopping it because the main imperialist power, USA, is backing Israel in doing that genocide. So in a way, we've got the same situation in the Philippines. We have the US as the main backer for this outrageous series of regimes that everyone's experienced in the Philippines. And the answer we're developing is a people's movement to expose and to isolate the political players involved in these really terrible crimes. We in the Philippine struggle, from looking at it from ICHRP's point of view, we're not winning. We're certainly not losing though, because the people continue to assert their rights despite all this repression, and in the international community, we, in a way, in these last few years of the work we've intensely done, we can see we've isolated the Foreign Secretary, the Minister, the Secretary of Justice, and so other figures of Philippines. And Duterte himself is still under threat of arrest from the International Criminal Court. So there's progress, but not final victories. We must ourselves maintain our sense of proportion, but also what is right, and stay committed to it. We should not be afraid of asserting what is right, and using all of the political skills we have to organize some real political pressure, as we have been doing.
Thank you, Peter. I think it was a very straightforward answer. We have a lot of work to do, but Sophia says also, I agree, salamat po. We have another question here. International humanitarian law are not punitive, so for governments, we have no shame from just exposing their illegal and punitive ways. What more can be done by allies for the protection of peasants and activists exposing the truth? Maybe Kapang, you could answer.
Yeah, I think aside from calling for continuing support and solidarity with the struggling peasants, primarily struggling for and campaigning for the implementation of genuine land reform, including the implementation of national industrialization program in the Philippines. We are also calling for the active support and the continuing solidarity with the struggle of the Filipino people, campaigning for the abrogation of unequal treaties, particularly military agreements and treaties like the Mutual Defense Treaty between the Philippines and the United States, the USRP Visiting Forces Agreement, the USRP Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, because these unequal agreements are being used by the US to not only to maintain, but to further strengthen its military presence on Philippine soil. Not only soil, but even on the Philippine waters. Actually, pushing for or provoking China with regards to the West Philippine Sea, and it's very dangerous for the Filipino people to be dragged further to this and be a proxy to the ever intensifying contradictions between China and the US. So that's why we have been struggling and campaigning for a genuine national freedom and democracy in our country for the Filipino people, free from imperialist control and domination, mainly by the US imperialists. So I think we have to really further amplify our call to stop the interference of the U.S. in various fields of in economy, in politics, in military security of affairs of the Philippines. And yes, we do not have an illusion that this under the regime of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who is the chief political representative of local ruling classes, exploiting classes of big landlords, comprador bourgeois, and bureaucrat capitalists, will really push for the independence of the Philippines. Under Marcos Jr. administration, there is no such thing as independent foreign policy. Its foreign policy is being really mainly dictated by the U.S. and the United States interests in various fields of its domination and control in the Philippine archipelago, in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you, Kapang. We have to close very, very quickly, but I see that we have Zarina raising her hand, so I'm gonna give you the floor for just 2 minutes.
Thank
You
you.
want to
Thank you,
go
Pichini.
next? Thank you.
I will not open my camera because I'm afraid you might lose me because I did not take a shower yet. But nonetheless, I wanted to share that. Thank you very much, everyone, for Kapay is laughing his heart out. But yes, thank you very much for all the very important information that everyone has shared with us today. But I would also like to add that all these campaigns are very important, especially now that elections are coming. I think that from the international community as well, what we can do from here is to support all the candidates for that are under the Makabayan slate, no, who are fighting for the people's struggles, those who are under the Makabayan slate running for senators, the party lists, Bayan Muna, Gabriela, Anak Pawis, Kabataan, and all other party lists and candidates under the Makabayan bloc. We raise their voices in the international level because what they are doing is to activate the parliamentary struggle, because in the government, they have a chance to change the policies that affect the Filipino people. So we need these people inside Congress, inside the Senate, and we need to help them raise their voices and to make known, especially to the voting migrant Filipinos in all the countries, in Europe, in the US, in Northern America, Latin America, wherever we are, to register and vote for these Makabayan candidates to be part of the government in order to espouse changes in our policies. And I think this is one way that we can help exposing and changing the policies that are so repressive and oppressive of the Filipino people. And so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, ICHRP, for this wonderful and very enlightening discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zarina. Thank you, because I think it's you wrapped up perfectly. And I just want to read out loud also what Peter has answered to Trelly, because it's a perfect conclusion also to say some more specific things to do for us is to travel to the Philippines and meet with the peasant organizations, meet with Kapang and people like Ronnie Manalo. We can also provide media exposure of these experiences, and also media exposure will be higher because there is an election, as Zarina has said, in a few months. We can raise funds to help the peasant organizations with bail funds, legal costs, etc. And of course, we can help with donations for October 21st events. And I think that with this, we're going to conclude this Q&A in this webinar calling for actions in solidarity with the peasants on October 21st, because it's the day the peasant movement will be mobilizing in Manila, so we can help express their demands, put them on the table. Give financial support to the peasants through our line donation system, ICHRP.net/peasant fundraiser. We can, of course, get involved in the long term in the solidarity movement for the Philippines and join ICHRP. And we can also support the work of ICHRP by becoming a monthly sustainer and donating a small but important amount. It's a new way to contribute, ICHRP.net/donate. I really want to thank everyone who participated and shared their insights. And I want to thank specifically PCFS and IPM-SDL because they co-sponsored our webinar. And of course, thank you everyone who attended the session today. If you agree, we would like to ask you to unmute your microphones and we can all together call for international solidarity with these 3 specific calls. Peter, you can give the go.
Stop the attacks on peasants.
Stop the attacks on peasants.
Support the Filipino people's call for genuine land reform.
Support the Filipino people's call for genuine land reform.
Oppose state terrorism in the Philippines.
Oppose state terrorism in the Philippines.
Thank you very much, everyone, and see you very soon in the next webinar or other activities for international solidarity with the Filipino people. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claire. Bye-bye now.
Salamat.
Ingat.
Bye.
Bye-bye.